Good morning. Every year, a lot of hunters ask me how I put a stove in my tent, and a wood stove. It sounds kind of dangerous to a lot of people, but I've been doing this for 50 years now, and have never had any problem like that. This tent is 31 years old, getting up there in age, but it still works good. It's got a sleeve here, or a hole in the side of the tent with a asbestos cloth. Getting kind of worn. It used to be tight, but the wind kind of moves around and abrades it over the years. But I like to do it this way. The first tent I ever used that was just like this was up in Canada on a moose hunting trip, and some Native Americans up there showed me how to set up the tent, and they had the hole in the side like this, and they said that's better than putting a hole in the roof, because they usually have problems with that water and coming through around the hole because of the wear that eventually happens. So we have one in the side like this. So it means our wood stove's inside. You might as well come inside here and take a look at it and see what we have here before we start putting on the stovepipes. Okay, this is my 2-barrel wood stove. It's not 255-gallon drums like they use up in Alaska. This one is made out of old water tanks welded together. And the door is down on the bottom one. This top part acts as a heat exchanger. And so it's a lot more efficient at heating than a single barrel. Single barrel, you get a lot of heat going up the chimney, but the heat's got to go through, come up from the bottom barrel and up through this pipe on this end here. Gets baffled around and then finally comes out here, and by the time it gets to this point, it's not near as hot as it was when it was first coming out of the lower barrel. So the top barrel on a double barrel stove is a heat exchanger. I had a flat piece welded on the top here for keeping coffee warm, warming up food for evening meals, things like that. That comes in real handy. Down here's the door, and for the front of the, and it has no grate or anything there. We never use one. I don't have to remove ashes until the end of, in the second week sometime in deer camp, so it works pretty well that way. We burn wood that burns very clear, very clean, and white ash left. We've got an adjustment here. It allows air flow to go in and out, and usually when we start the stove, we want to get a lot of heat going up the chimney so the smoke goes out instead of back down here into the tent. And so you want it to be really, I'll show you this later when we put in our first firewood, how that works. But we have this adjustment here, and there's another adjustment that goes on the stovepipe above that helps to slow down the burning of the wood, so we can adjust heat in the tent using this one and that one up above. But very simple, easy to use. Now down here we have legs welded on. I added the strapping here to give those legs a little extra support, but it keeps it off the ground, and that's far enough. We never have had anything ignite around the stove. You can see we're kind of in a grassy meadow here where the tent is sitting, but this grass will be all flattened down before you know it, but there's no chance of starting a fire here. But that's our stove. We've had this stove now about, I think, 20 years, I think, something like that. I had another one. It was a bigger one, a 2-barrel type stove, and finally wore it out, burned it out. But this one has been holding up really well with these old water tanks. As you can see, we're going to have a pipe that goes onto this heat exchanger part and comes up with an elbow on it that goes out here. And we'll have to have a way of adjusting the flow through the chimney. We'll have a pipe that's special made for that. So we'll get started here. I got to go out and get the parts that go on here and go out through this hole. Okay, I'll get these pipes all added to the inside here on the stove. Now, when you put on a stovepipe, there's a female part of the pipe and there's a male part. Now, the female part has to go on the outside, always. If you had this reversed, you'd have all kinds of smoke coming out of your stovepipe. Yeah, it's always got, here's the female part going down over the male part on the stove, and here's an elbow going down over the male part on that pipe. And get it poked, pointing in the right direction here. Okay, now the next pipe, this is also something that it's got something called a damper on it. It's a little thing inside. You turn it, you can see it can close up the pipe completely. See how the damper works? When it's wide open, the smoke can go billowing out here at will, and if you slow it down, close it a little bit, then it can't go out as fast, and the fire won't burn as fast. So it's another way of adjusting the amount of heat we have in the tent at any one time. Okay. Yeah. I like to turn it so I can readily see the handle. When the handle's horizontal, it's wide open, and when you turn it up like that, it's closed. So that's our damper. Okay. Now this piece goes on that damper pipe. Yeah, putting these ends together can be a little exasperating at times, but they have to be tight. And here's my damper section out here. I have to take it off, get it on this outer section. So we'll put this through the hole here and get it hooked back up to the stove. Yeah, years ago I used to set up this tent all by myself, the framework and everything. I have a big box that we use for a latrine with a hole on top. I'd put a sturdy chair on top of that and climb up there and stand on that to do this work up high. But right now what we got to do is raise this pipe so it's horizontal. You don't want it to be going down, and I don't want it to be rubbing against that fabric on the tent any more than it has all these years. Keep wearing it out. But even though there's an open hole around the stovepipe there, it never gets cold enough in there because of that with the stove running. Anyway, so yeah, my kids say now that I'm 81, I gotta use a ladder. Dad, you gotta be doing all those foolish things you used to do. So we want to get that stovepipe horizontal by tying it to one of my A-frames on the tent here. You know, I learned how to do this too from those young Native Americans from the Red Lake Indian Reservation up in Ontario, Canada. And I've been doing it like that ever since. And it's been a wonderful way to set up a big wall tent. And attaching that stovepipe by a wire to this A-frame, and I get it adjusted to where it's straight. One of the important parts of putting up stovepipes like this around the tent is it's got to be attached to the tent in a way that when the wind blows and the tent rocks, the stovepipe rocks with the tent. If it was separate when the wind's blowing, the stovepipes could come apart, which wouldn't be good. If you got a big fire going in the stove, all of a sudden the tent would be full of smoke. But by attaching the stovepipe to this framework, if it rocks at all, it'll rock with the tent and it won't pull the pipes apart. And so that's kind of important. Now, the next thing we need is a tall log like this one. It's going to support the stovepipe, and we want a tall stovepipe. And the reason we want it tall is two reasons. One is you get it up well above the tent, you aren't going to have smoke coming from the end of the stovepipe into the tent. And the other is even more important. You want it tall because you don't want sparks coming from the stove and coming out of the end of the stovepipe and settling on your tent roof. You're going to be full of holes up there before you know it if the stovepipe is too short. You want a good distance there. Now you can, one of the things we learned over the years, never start a fire in your stove with newspaper. Newspaper pieces that big will go right up the chimney, burning, and could settle on your tent and start your tent on fire. You get a lot of sparks from newspaper. We use charcoal lighter. Put charcoal lighter on the wood, you get no sparks from the charcoal lighter. And it burns intently. And what that does, when you get a good intense flame right away, it forces air to go whizzing up the chimney. If you didn't do that, when you start the fire, cold air column in the stovepipe will keep the smoke from going up and out. And the smoke will want to come into the tent. So we use the charcoal lighter. That gives you a good intense flame to start with. You get a really quick movement of that cold column of air out the chimney. All your smoke goes out the chimney and there's no sparks. So this is a good way to do it. But that stovepipe needs good support. And we're going to start with a pole like this. And, well, the first thing I guess we better do is dig a little hole here at the bottom, because we don't want this pole to move around. Okay, well, we dug the little hole here for the base of the pole here. You got to do that before you mark it for the chimney height. And it's kind of important to mark the pole, because you have all kinds of problems. A lot of nasty words being spoken when things don't line up properly here. Now the stovepipe, the bottom of the stovepipe is going to end up right about here. There, that's well marked. Okay, now we'll take the pole down and we're going to attach the stovepipe with the pole laying flat on the ground. Okay, we got the pole laying on a flat surface here. Here's the part I marked right there, my mark. That's the base of the pole. Now we're going to put the stovepipe together and then lay it alongside the pole. This is a simple but tricky operation. We'll be back to you in a minute. Okay, we got our stack of stovepipes put together. And what we're going to do is lay this down. Let's see, where's my mark?